Will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Rosas, as you note in your book, we've seen this phenomenon where members of Congress, you just made reference to Mr. Nadler referring to Antifa as a myth, that it's a false issue. The FBI director said that Antifa is, quote, not a group or an organization, it's a movement or an ideology, end quote. Secretary Mayorkas insists that Antifa should not be called domestic terrorists. It seems to me we've got to distinguish between ideological movements and those who lapse over into something beyond that. You made a distinction in talking about BLM protests, that the 93% were peaceful, but the 7% were remarkably destructive and violent. Speak to that. Isn't it important for all of us to draw those distinctions clearly and not slough them over, not blur them?
Yeah, absolutely. Just because, Antifa is, they have, as you mentioned, they very much operate on a decentralized, small unit level, and that's on purpose so that local law enforcement has a harder time trying to take action and take it down, because if they take down one cell, there's another one in the same area, particularly Portland and the Pacific Northwest. There's even some here in the DC area. So yes, I mean, this isn't complicated. This is a real movement that people identify with, and they have historically, even before 2020, taken violent action against innocent people.
So as best I've been able to see, Antifa in particular, and the just observations I've made, they are organized around the notion of violent protest.
Yes.
And I guess I'd ask you if that's an accurate understanding. And so if they exist in these small cells, maybe linked by this ideology of some sort, how are they organized and led, and how do they interact and coordinate with each other, and how do they get their funds, if you have insight about that?
So, I mean, just how any other group kind of organizes today. I mean, they all use social media. Half the reason why I knew where to be in 2020 is because they advertised freely on social media sites like Twitter. Now, this is pre-Elon Musk Twitter. Some of them have been taken down in the time since he took over, but they organize on social media. They organize in encrypted chats as well. And when it comes to funding, I mean, they openly solicit donations on their PayPals, Venmos, Cash App, and that's kind of how they, at least publicly, are able to sustain themselves. I mean, just from personal experience, I used to live in the DC area, unfortunately, and I would see some of the same people over and over again at these protests, and I would kind of wonder how you're able to hold down a job if you're constantly at these things. And of course, I'm there because that's my job to cover what they're doing. So it's not really complicated. They organize openly on social media in more discreet ways, and they raise money openly too.
Thank you, Mr. Rosas. Mr. Erickson, and somewhat quickly, because I got a limited amount of time left, from your perspective, your experience in Homeland Security, is Antifa, groups like that, a real threat that needs to be attended to by Congress and by the department?
Absolutely, it's a real threat. During this summer of 2020, when I was at Homeland Security, I traveled with the then Secretary to Portland to visit with our federal law enforcement officers who were at that time in the midst of well over a month of continued, sustained violent assault. It's a very real phenomenon. It's a very real danger, and we should deal with it.
Ms. Gaines, toward the end of your statement, I sort of had to hurry you along at the end, but I want to get to that in particular. I was troubled, and it was just spoken of outside the hearing before, that the Vice President for Student Affairs at San Francisco sort of lauded what happened to you, or at least said that it was people who attacked you demonstrated, quote, the value of free speech and the right to protest peacefully. What's your reaction to statements like that about the mob that you confronted? You got about 45 seconds, you can take it all.
What I saw was not peaceful by any means. The Vice President released an email to their student body applauding, word for word, I applaud the tremendously brave students who behaved the way they did. Which when I read this, knowing what I know, what I went through, seeing what I saw, that was not peaceful. And to applaud that behavior from an institution of higher education is chilling. It's terrifying that that is something we're encouraging, we're celebrating. By no means did they say we uphold the freedom of speech or condemn violence.
I think that's a critically important point, and I appreciate your making it. My time has expired. I now recognize Ranking Member Ivy for 5 minutes for questions he